Hi, this is Shelomo Solson, the host of the Teenage Impact Podcast, and welcome to my fourth episode of Sofa Chat with Shelomo Solson, where I talk about my experiences and lessons throughout the years and different ideas that pop up in my mind every day or every week. And I want to share with you either to inspire you or share with you so you can implement some of these lessons into your own life. And I was on a train ride in Philadelphia, and I was thinking about how far I've come in public speaking. I was this shy little boy who always used to get laughed at every time he would give a presentation. I remember this one time in high school and college, the first 15 seconds of me giving this presentation, and people laughed at me. And I had braces at the time. I couldn't pronounce my words. And people used to say I have this speech impediment. And I was just, looking back and reflecting on how far I've come. Now when I speak, in front of hundreds of people, I do it confidently. And people say, Shelomo, wow, you're such a natural. How did you get so good at public speaking? I bet you were born this way. And people who didn't know me back then, I kind of laughed and said, I wasn't always like this. I struggled for many years. I was in speech class for 7 years, and English was not my first language. I struggled, but I made a decision that I was going to one day be a confident speaker and inspire many people around the world. So it started with a decision. I want to share with you 3 tips on how you can become a confident speaker. You don't have to become a speaker to be a confident speaker. If you are a co-captain of a sport in your school, you have to get up there and speak to inspire your team. Whether you're the president or the vice president or the treasurer for one of your committees in high school, you have to get up there and speak. Whether you're giving a class presentation, you have to get up and speak. And when you grow up, you have to get up and speak. And the core to everything is influence. If you look at one of the most successful and influential people in the world, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Oprah, Martin Luther King, they all spoke with influence and power. And I want to share with you 3 tips on what it takes to be one of those confident speakers. Tip number 1, know your subject. This is probably the most important tip. I want to take you back to when I was 21 years old and I had to give a presentation in school. I think that year I gave about 5 presentations in a few months, and that's when I really started to get good at presenting because I had to. I was in this one group for human resource management, a group of I think 4 or 5, and every group gave a presentation on a different country. My group gave a presentation on India. Now my mom is from India, so I'm not an expert, but I knew basically more than the whole class did. And I was passionate about the subject, and I knew I can deliver a confident presentation on India. So when we went up there, and every person had to give a small part of the presentation, the class had to give different love notes or feedback notes to each person in the group. And a lot of the feedback I got from the classmates was I was the best presenter in the group. And the fact was I wasn't the best presenter in the group. I just knew my subject really well. When I was in project management class, which I absolutely hated, and I kind of winged it throughout my senior year on that class. And when I had to give a presentation on that class, I winged the presentation. The class knew I winged it. The teacher knew I winged it. And I didn't do as well. It's important to know your subject. Tip number 2, your presentation is not about you. It's about the audience and the subject you are delivering. A lot of times, many speakers I see and I coach students, they're focused on the wrong things. How do I look? Am I saying the right things? Am I saying it the right way? What is the audience thinking about me right now? Your presentation is not about you. It's about getting your message across in a confident manner and making sure the audience understands your message and understands your subject. The reason why I was able to give such a great presentation about India to my classmates is because I genuinely wanted my classmates to learn about India because I was the only Indian person in that entire classroom. Next time you give a presentation in class, next time you give a presentation to your teammates, and maybe you're in a sport, maybe you're in football and basketball and track and field, and you really need this win, and you have to inspire your team. You're not going to think about yourself and say, oh, did I say that correctly? No, you want to pump up your team because it's game time, because the team needs this great message for them to get pumped up and for them to win the next game. Tip number 3 is to practice, practice, and practice. I can't stress how important practice is. I was interviewing Grant Baldwin. He's an international speaker, giving hundreds and hundreds of presentations around the world. And he talks about a presentation is like studying for your exam. You don't go to an exam, a hard exam, and wing it. Unless you really know your material. You don't go to an exam and wing it, because when you wing it, you get nervous about it. That's where the anxiety forms. The same thing applies to giving a presentation. When you go to give a presentation, practice, practice, practice. The more you practice, the more confident you'll come across and give a phenomenal presentation. So here are these 3 tips. Tip number 1, know your subject. Tip number 2, it's about the audience and subject. And tip number 3, practice, practice, practice. I hope you can really use these tips for your next presentation, because these tips might be basic and might seem like common sense, but it's the core to being a great presenter, public speaker, and the core to being an excellent leader.